Tonight's story isn't a verdict, it's commentary on headlines and whispers that refuse to die down. Multiple outlets and old court clips are being stitched together online, and fans are shocked at what people claim it all adds up to. A speeding van on a cold Missouri night, a clunky 1980s cell phone with one saved number, and a young shot caller from South Central, whose name keeps surfacing in the same breath as the Cali Cartel and a record label that would change hip-hop forever. According to the chatter, one tiny mistake snowballed into wiretaps across borders, raids before sunrise, and a courtroom marathon that left the family divided and the streets buzzing. Emotions ran high as timelines filled with alleged calls, coded words like birds, and a money trail that some say flowed straight from cocaine to culture. We're not saying it happened, we're saying this is the version racing through comment sections, barbershops, and late-night spaces. In that telling, a kid they called Waterhead Bo didn't just sell weight, he ran it like a corporation until a trooper's flashlight and a phone's glowing screen supposedly cracked the whole facade. If even half of what people are saying is true, then tonight's question is simple. How did one number bring an empire to its knees? They say every legend starts with a rumor, but this one begins with a whisper that turned into a wildfire. The streets are buzzing again, old files resurfacing, voices online piecing together fragments of a forgotten empire. People call him Waterhead Bo, though nobody agrees on where the name came from. Some say it was from his childhood in Detroit, others swear it stuck during his early days in South Central. What everyone agrees on is this: he went from stocking supermarket shelves to allegedly becoming one of the most powerful yet hidden figures, linking American streets to the Colombian cartel machine. The idea sounds cinematic, almost too much like a movie, and yet fans can't stop talking about how every thread connects. One phone number, one van, and one ordinary traffic stop that supposedly exposed a network spanning oceans. The rumor goes that it all started with a missed detail 13 miles per hour too fast on a quiet highway. Nothing flashy, no shootout, no chase, just flashing red lights cutting through the night, and a nervous driver who forgot to breathe. What the officer found next, according to the chatter, wasn't cash or weapons, but a phone. A thick, heavy Motorola, the kind only rich businessmen or high-level dealers could afford in the late 80s. That one device, people say, became the blueprint for how the feds unraveled one of the biggest drug cases in modern history. Commentators claim that phone led them to Brian Waterhead Bo, a name that until then meant nothing outside Florence Avenue. Online documentaries claim he wasn't the typical street boss. No flashy jewelry, no loud parties, no chaotic corner hustles. He moved differently, thought differently, played the long game. According to people who knew of him, Bo studied business magazines more than rap lyrics. He believed cocaine wasn't a product, it was logistics. That's what made him dangerous. The streets say he turned an illegal hustle into a corporate structure, one man's enterprise quietly feeding a chain that stretched from Los Angeles to Detroit, from Mexico to Denmark. And behind it all, a calm, asthmatic kid who once struggled to lift grocery boxes without wheezing. Those who remember him from back then describe a strange duality: polite to mothers, generous to kids, but cold as steel when it came to business. His rise didn't happen overnight, it grew out of desperation. People around him talk about how he saw his family scraping by, his mother counting coins just to pay for milk, his brothers already halfway lost to the streets. So when the Colombian connection appeared, whispering promises of wealth, he listened. Some insiders say the man who introduced him to that world wasn't even from the neighborhood. A visitor, a quiet figure from Cali, Colombia, Mario Bavona Alvarado. They met, allegedly, in the back of a supermarket where Bo worked. Two men who saw opportunity in chaos. Mario had the source, Bo had the streets. Together they formed a bridge that would change everything. What followed, the rumors are even half true, was nothing short of cinematic. Safe houses sprouted up in Phoenix, Vegas, and Detroit. Money laundering fronts appeared overnight, check cashing stores, fake trucking companies, shell corporations run by faces nobody could trace. Former agents have hinted that they'd never seen a street-level player think so strategically. Instead of fighting for territory, Bo bought silence. Instead of flexing with violence, he invested in loyalty. For years, he flew under the radar, building a machine so efficient it fooled even the DEA. According to some leaked reports, agents once believed they were tracking multiple groups. Turns out, it might have all been one. But the bigger the web, the more visible it becomes. And Bo's problem, as fans online love to say, wasn't greed, it was comfort. He got too comfortable, too trusting. The same innovation that made him untouchable became the tool that exposed him. Those phones, his symbol of progress, became the Fed's golden tickets. It's said that every dealer in his network carried one, pre-programmed with specific numbers. It made coordination faster, but also easier to trace. When the trooper in Missouri turned that phone on, it wasn't just a device, it was a confession waiting to be decoded. People who've studied the case say the number found inside connected to Arizona, one of Bo's safe zones. Within 72 hours, investigators in 3 different countries allegedly launched joint operations trying to map the network. Danish intelligence, Italian surveillance, American federal task forces all moving in sync. Some even say wiretaps caught fragments of Bo's coded conversations. Talk about birds flying by Christmas, about paper coming when Detroit lands. Everyday slang turned into legal evidence. Still, not everyone buys the official story. Some say Bo was framed, that his rise was too threatening to existing powers. Others think he was simply too young to realize how fragile his kingdom was. Either way, by the late 80s, he'd become a myth, a name whispered with both respect and fear. He was the dealer who didn't need to pull a gun, the businessman who wore suits to meetings while others carried heat, and he had allies in unexpected places: musicians, promoters, hustlers, trying to clean their money through entertainment. That's where the rumors start tying him to a different world entirely. The world of hip-hop. The story goes that during one of his Vegas trips, an associate named Michael Harris, known later in rap circles as Harry O, pitched an idea, a label that would give a voice to the streets, something real, raw, and unstoppable. But like everything else, it needed capital, clean money, or at least money that looked clean. Whispers say that Bo didn't fully understand what he was funding, that to him it was just another side hustle. But the timing lines up, and fans can't ignore the eerie overlap as his empire peaked. Death Row Records was born. The connection might be coincidence, or it might be the most ironic twist in American music history. Those early whispers are full of contradictions. Some say Bo wanted out, tired of running, suffocated by paranoia. Others say he was expanding, planning routes into Miami and Chicago. No one agrees on the truth, but everyone agrees on how it ended: fast, loud, and final. The same cold precision that made him feared couldn't save him from a random trooper doing his job. One speeding van, one mistake, one number, and that's how the myth begins to crumble. People online have spent years reconstructing that night. Was the stop accidental, or was it a setup? Did the feds already know and just wait for the right moment? The timelines never quite match, but the story doesn't die. Because in that version of history, Waterhead Bo wasn't just a criminal, he was a symbol of how small details bring down big dreams. A 13-mile difference that costs millions, families, and eventually freedom. And while the case files may gather dust, the legend keeps resurfacing, with new voices claiming new details, new confessions, new angles. And somewhere between the myth and the memory, the man himself fades into the background. A ghost whose empire built songs, funded records, and rewrote the rules of the game, all before his 25th birthday. The kind of story that makes you wonder not just what happened, but why people can't stop telling it. The story that unfolds next is where fact and rumor blur completely, where every version sounds more unbelievable than the last. People who claim to have known him back then say that once the money started flowing, Bo moved like a ghost. No photos, no press, no paper trail, just whispers and coded phone calls. Those who worked for him say he never raised his voice, never carried a weapon, never looked nervous. He treated the whole operation like a board meeting. What outsiders called a drug ring, insiders described as a corporation. He had departments, hierarchies, and even rules about how employees should dress when handling product. One former associate allegedly said, "You didn't feel like you worked for a dealer. You felt like you worked for IBM only. We sold powder instead of computers." Rumors from the late 80s claim his network reached 11 states, all linked by his favorite tool, the phone. Each device pre-programmed with just a few trusted numbers. To the outside world, it was cutting-edge tech. To law enforcement, it became a roadmap of his empire. The calls between Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Copenhagen were constant, and that's where the name Oscar starts showing up. Nobody knows if Oscar was real, a code name, or a myth built into the legend. But according to court chatter, he was one of the Cali Cartel's most secretive middlemen. Oscar allegedly supplied Bo through Mario Verbona, who handled the European front. What's fascinating to fans today is how global the whole operation sounds. Danish banks, Italian surveillance, American dealers. It was the first time anyone had mapped a drug trail that read like an international trade route. By 1987, people around Bo say he had too much money to count. Literally. Machines hummed all night, feeding cash through rollers, printing receipts of success and paranoia at once. He started investing in fronts that could blend illegal profits with clean business, check cashing stores, car rentals, trucking companies, and eventually, a limousine service. Because in that world, you always needed a ride that didn't get searched. Friends say he was careful, but not careful enough. And in every story like this, there's always that one person who talks too much. Stanley McCarnes, one of his lieutenants, supposedly bragged about their reach in St. Louis, claiming that we move more birds in a week than most cats move in a lifetime. If that quote ever really existed, it was the kind of ego that gets noticed across Los Angeles. The name Waterhead Bo became a quiet legend. People at the barbershops whispered about the kid from Florence who had the Colombian plug. Some rappers mentioned him in coded lines, others just referenced the boss who moves like a ghost. At that time, the hip-hop scene was exploding, and drug money was everywhere behind the curtains. Promoters, managers, and upcoming rappers often shared the same streets with dealers trying to wash their profits. The connection between music and the streets wasn't a secret, it was survival. And in that intersection, Bo's story took its strangest turn. Michael Harris, better known later as Harry O, was already serving time for attempted murder but still had influence. People say he was fascinated by Bo's structure, by how professional everything seemed. One night, according to prison folklore, Harry O told a cellmate that if he ever got out, he'd build a label that reflected the same precision, a company that would turn street power into cultural dominance. That idea, many believe, became the seed of Death Row Records. What's wild is how some timelines line up too perfectly to ignore. Bo's empire peaking in 1987-88, Death Row's early formation happening shortly after, and both names sharing connections through lawyers and mutual acquaintances. Now, no one's saying Bo directly handed over money to fund music, but that's what makes the rumor so captivating. The suggestion alone creates drama. People want to believe that the same cash fueling chaos in the streets somehow paid for the beats that defined an era. Fans argue in forums, pulling old newspaper clippings, pointing out the coincidence that David Kenneth, a lawyer who defended BOL, became the same man representing Suge Knight and Tupac. How much overlap can be coincidence before it becomes a pattern? As the months rolled by, Bo's operation became almost too perfect. Shipments were arriving on time, profits steady, and connections expanding. He was seen in Vegas wearing expensive watches, tipping hotel staff hundreds just for carrying his bags. Witnesses say he wasn't loud about it, he had that quiet confidence, the kind that unnerves people who can't figure out where the money's coming from. He wasn't trying to be Scarface, he was trying to be invisible. But invisibility lies exposure, and the more he grew, the more he attracted attention. The D was already running an operation called Pisces, targeting Colombian traffickers across the U.S. When Bo's name allegedly surfaced in connection with Mario Verbona, that was enough to spark international interest. Investigators in Denmark picked up coded calls about birds and paper and started tracing money movements between Copenhagen and Los Angeles. Italian agents monitoring phone lines claimed to catch fragments of similar exchanges, and while most of it was circumstantial, it painted a picture of something massive. The feds had patience. They just needed proof. By 1988, small cracks began showing. Mario was reportedly behind on payments to Oscar, a $3 million debt that added tension to their once flawless operation. According to wiretap transcripts, there were heated calls, hushed arguments, threats disguised as business talk. "Don't make me dry up your rivers," Oscar allegedly said, a cartel way of saying, "pay or be cut off." Inside Bo's circle, tension grew. His lieutenants argued about missing shipments, about risk versus expansion. Paranoia spread quietly. That's when fate or bad luck decided to intervene. The Missouri stop was just one van one night. The driver, Willie Childress, was a low-level courier who'd made dozens of runs before without issue. But that night, nerves got him. Some say he'd been using the product, others that he'd just been up for too many hours. Either way, he drove too fast. When the trooper pulled him over, his story fell apart within minutes. Then came the phone. The officer scrolled through numbers, and one stood out in Arizona code. It didn't seem important at first, but by morning analysts were connecting it to a network of intercepted calls. The domino effect that followed was unreal. Within 72 hours, teams in 3 countries were cross-referencing wiretaps, watching safe houses, tracking bank activity. The van seizure in Missouri became the thread that unraveled a tapestry no one had been able to touch for years. And while Bo himself was still unaware of how close the feds were, everyone around him felt it. Mario was panicking. Oscar was calling non-stop. Some say Bo even noticed his phone line clicking, a sign of a tapped wire, but by then, it was too late. The empire he built so carefully was already collapsing in slow motion. Those who look back now call it poetic. The same man who mastered logistics fell because of a routine stop. The same devices that kept him efficient became his undoing. No betrayal, no setup, just one mistake. 13 miles per hour too fast. It's the kind of irony that storytellers love because it feels unreal yet perfectly human. And as people online keep saying, every empire ends the same way, not in flames, but in silence. When nobody realizes the fall has already begun. The silence didn't last long. Within days of that Missouri traffic stop, phones started ringing in every corner of Bo's network. Couriers stopped answering calls. Stash houses went dark. and lieutenants began whispering about how much the feds really knew. Mario Verbona was reportedly pacing inside his Danish apartment, chain-smoking as he dialed Colombian numbers that no longer picked up. The calm that had defined their operation cracked wide open. And in that panic, people started making mistakes. Some withdrew money they shouldn't have touched. Others disappeared altogether. What none of them realized was that law enforcement was already inside the system, listening, logging, building a map. They say Bo was in Tempe, Arizona, when the first arrests started happening. A normal day by his standards, counting cash, delegating calls, pretending everything was fine. His girlfriend at the time, Linda Payton, later told friends he seemed distracted that week, like he could feel something coming. The phone kept buzzing, and every new call brought bad news. Mario's wife in Denmark had noticed unmarked cars near their home. One of the couriers in Vegas got picked up for a broken taillight and never came back. Oscar had gone completely silent, and for the first time, Bo didn't have control. He wasn't used to being the one in the dark. Then, according to what's been pieced together from testimony and whispers, came the wiretaps. November 11, 1988, the feds had enough to connect voices, dates, and coded phrases. They claimed Bo's voice could be heard on tapes, ordering birds and demanding paper by Detroit. Investigators built a timeline that made it seem like he was orchestrating it all, though whether that's the full truth or an edited version of it will always be debated. What can't be denied is how fast everything fell apart after that. It wasn't a single bust, it was an avalanche. 17 raids across 3 states, over 300 agents moving in before sunrise. People who'd once bragged about being untouchable were dragged out of bed in handcuffs. Mario Verbona was pulled from his Malibu home, still in his underwear. Stanley McCarnes was found in Compton, hiding in a friend's basement. Maria Barona and Elsa Martinez, who allegedly handled female courier operations, were arrested in their apartments before breakfast. They called it the biggest West Coast operation since Operation Pisces, but online commentators now call it something else. The day the Empire stopped breathing. Reports say when they finally reached Bo's home, he didn't fight. No running, no shouting, no last-minute escape. The FBI kicked down the door, flashbangs blinding the room, and there he was, calm, barefoot, and quiet. One agent described it like he had been waiting for them. It's almost cinematic. The image of the man who once commanded a multi-million-dollar network sitting at the edge of his bed, hands open. As agents tore through the room, when they cuffed him, he supposedly looked one of them in the eye and said, "I guess the phone finally stitched." What the agents found was staggering: 1,100 pounds of cocaine from the Missouri van, over $5 million in cash, and a stack of ledgers filled with coded notes that read like a hybrid between a shipping schedule and a diary. There were also 23 cell phones, each tied to a different city. Investigators claimed it was the most advanced communication system they'd ever seen from a street-level figure. But the true prize was one specific phone: Bo's personal motive. Inside were numbers, nicknames, and small reminders that painted the whole network in digital ink. One note even said, "Call Harry," a detail that later fueled endless theories online about the death row connection. When the indictments dropped, the headlines went wild. Colombian pipeline cracked, hip-hop ties to drug empire. Cocaine CEO captured. Every journalist wanted a piece of the story. For weeks, Los Angeles couldn't stop talking about the connection between dope money and music dreams. Fans argued whether any of it was true or just media fantasy. What made it even more dramatic was the cast of characters: Bo, the quiet genius turned ghost; Mario, the slick international broker; and Harry O, the ambitious dreamer who wanted to turn drug cash into art. It was the kind of story that made America both fascinated and horrified. While the world speculated, Bo sat in a federal cell. According to court transcripts, he spent most of his time reading newspapers about his own case, watching strangers tell his story with confidence. The irony wasn't lost on him. They called him a kingpin, a terrorist, a mastermind, and somewhere in between all those titles was a human being trying to understand how one bad night on the highway had rewritten his entire life. People who visited him said he didn't talk much, just asked for updates on his family: his mother Minnie, his brothers Tony and Darren, his sister Carmen. The same family he'd tried to protect was now being dragged through news cycles as symbols of greed. The trial that followed became theater. Prosecutors painted him as the missing link between American street gangs and the Cali Cartel. They called witnesses, played hours of wiretaps, and paraded cash and cocaine through the courtroom like props. The defense tried to argue that the tapes were out of context, that coded language was just street slang. But when the jury heard Bo's voice saying, "I need 2,000 birds by Christmas," the room froze. Reporters later described the silence as suffocating. Even those who thought the case was exaggerated felt the weight of that line. And in the middle of it all was the quietest person in the room: Bo himself. No outbursts, no excuses. He listened, nodded occasionally, but never lost composure. When asked why he'd done it, he didn't give the answer anyone expected. "I never wanted to be famous," he reportedly said. "I just didn't want to be hungry." That single sentence became the headline of 1,000 think pieces. It turned him from a villain into a tragic symbol of ambition, poverty, and the system that feeds both. Outside, fans debated whether he deserved sympathy or condemnation. Some said he was a visionary who understood the economy better than most businessmen. Others called him poison, a man who sold destruction wrapped in discipline. But regardless of opinion, everyone agreed on one thing: the man had changed the game. Before him, the cartel stayed separate from the streets. After him, the two became business partners. The prosecutors wanted a message sent: life without parole, no deals, no leniency. They painted his success as proof that drug money was funding cultural corruption. That's where Death Row Records came back into the narrative. The rumor spread that money from Bo's network had indirectly seeded the label, even though there was no hard proof. The timeline was perfect enough for headlines. It didn't matter whether it was truth or myth, a story stuck, because the world loves irony. And nothing's more ironic than the same money destroying communities also financing their anthems. On the final week of the trial, Bo took the stand against his lawyer's advice. Reporters said the courtroom held its breath as he defended his actions with unnerving calm. He compared the drug trade to corporate America, pointing out how legal industries profit from addiction to they just call theirs prescription, he said. Prosecutors jumped on it, accusing him of trying to justify murder with marketing. But those who heard him speak said it wasn't arrogance, it was exhaustion. After months of being dissected and demonized, he was just telling his truth. Whatever version of it still belonged to him. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On May 18, 1990, the verdict came back guilty on all counts. No celebration, no gasps, just the sound of papers shuffling and a woman crying in the back row. That was his mother. When they read the sentence, life without parole, Bo turned to her and mouthed 3 words: "I love you." The courtroom went silent again. Some call that moment justice. Others call it tragedy. But in that stillness, a myth was sealed forever. The myth didn't die with the sentence, it evolved. While Brian Bennett, the man the world called Waterhead Bo, disappeared behind steel doors and concrete walls, his name kept echoing in the same places he once ruled. News anchors moved on. Headlines faded, but the streets kept talking. They said he was still pulling strings from prison, that the same discipline that built his empire now kept him alive inside. Others claimed he went quiet, refusing interviews, rejecting deals from journalists who wanted to turn his downfall into a bestseller. Whatever the truth, one thing became clear: Bo didn't vanish. He became legend. The Federal Bureau of Prisons housed him in a high-security facility in California. Guards described him as polite, quiet, and eerily composed. No fights, no trouble, just routine. Some inmates said he spent hours reading business books and writing letters he never mailed. He kept to himself, except when young prisoners asked for advice. Think long, move quiet, he supposedly told them. The same philosophy that once made him millions now became survival wisdom inside the walls. Outside those walls, the narrative took a strange turn. Music was changing the world, and somewhere beneath the platinum records and sold-out tours, there were whispers about where the money had come from. Fans online started connecting dots between timelines: Bo's empire collapsing in late 1988, and by early 1991, Death Row Records emerging as a dominant force. Some believed the label was symbolic redemption, that the streets took back what the system had taken. Others saw it as a near poetic cycle where the same dollars that fueled destruction built culture's loudest voice. Even now, decades later, threads on forums debate whether Death Row's foundation was dirty money gone legit, or just rumors spun into myth. Michael Harry O'Harris, the man once tied to Bo's network, was locked up to when Death Row began. And when he walked free decades later, pardoned in 2021, old stories resurfaced like ghosts that refused to stay buried. Snoop Dogg, who lobbied for Harry's release, told reporters that it's all about second chances. What fans noticed, though, was how full circle it felt. The label that changed hip-hop was born in the same storm that took down Waterhead Bo. It's as if their stories were two sides of the same dollar bill, one side printed in blood, the other in rhythm. But what happened to Bo himself after sentencing remains a mystery. Federal documents show he served roughly 25 years before quietly walking out, released to a world that had forgotten his name. There were no cameras waiting, no headlines announcing freedom. He stepped out into the same California air that once carried the echoes of his empire, and then he vanished. No social media, no interviews, no memoirs. Mario Vibona, his old partner, was deported back to Colombia around the same time. Both men disappeared into silence, leaving behind nothing but speculation. What's fascinating is how people filled that silence. Documentaries, podcasts, and late-night hosts kept reviving the tale, each one twisting it slightly differently. Some paint Bo as a misunderstood genius who built an empire too efficient for its own good. Others see him as a cautionary tale, a man who mistook profit for purpose and paid the ultimate price. Whichever version you believe, the through line remains the same. He was the bridge between two worlds, crime and culture, destruction and creation. Former D agent Mike Vigil once said in an interview, Bennett changed the game forever. Before him, cartels and American street gangs were separate. After him, they were business partners. That quote alone cemented Bo's mythos, because in every story about ambition and downfall, there's always that one name who becomes the blueprint. And for generations of hustlers and dreamers alike, Waterhead Bo became exactly that, a cautionary legend whispered in the same breath as Escobar, Guzman, and BMF. Even now, when old school tracks like California Love or Gin and Juice blast from car speakers, fans online joke that they're hearing cartel money on beat. It's half humor, half truth, depending on who you ask. The irony cuts deep. Music that defined resilience and rebellion might have roots in the same underworld that tried to destroy both. And every time Snoop steps on stage or Dr. Dre's production shakes a stadium, someone in the comments inevitably writes, "Somewhere out there, Waterhead Bo's ghost is nodding his head." What makes his story so enduring isn't just the crime or the connection, it's the transformation. A kid from Detroit who grew up hungry, turned the system upside down, made millions, lost everything, and then slipped into the shadows. It reads like fiction, but the emotion in it feels real. Poverty, ambition, betrayal, consequence, universal themes dressed in drug money and cell phones. The same themes that drive the very music his alleged funds once helped birth. In a way, Bo's life mirrors the American paradox itself. The dream of success at any cost, the pursuit of empire and a country built on them, and the tragic truth that every empire eventually collapses under its own weight. The streets remember him not as a monster, but as a man who flew too close to the sun with a brick phone instead of wings. Some say he found peace after prison, living quietly somewhere in the Midwest under another name. Others insist he's still out there, helping lost kids the way he wished someone had helped him. No one knows for sure, and maybe that's how he wanted it. When people tell his story now, it's less about cocaine and more about consequence. It's about how one number on one phone changed everything, how a single decision can echo for decades, how legends are born not from victories, but from the ruins they leave behind. Brian Waterhead Bo Bennett may have vanished, but his shadow lingers in every cautionary headline, every lyric that celebrates hustle, and every conversation about where the line between genius and madness truly lies. Some call it karma, some call it fate, but maybe it's just history doing what it always does, turning truth into myth and myth into memory. And as long as people keep asking, how did one number bring down an empire, his story will never really end. And that's the part that keeps everyone talking, because even decades later, the story of Waterhead Bo still feels unfinished. People online are split. Some see him as the mastermind who changed everything, others as the cautionary tale who proved that no empire, no matter how smartly built, can outrun time. His name may have faded from the news, but his fingerprints linger on both sides of history, one coated in powder, the other pressed onto platinum records. Every time a new podcast revisits his legacy or a fan uncovers an old document, the same question comes back louder than before. Was he a villain, a visionary, or just another player who moved one step too fast? What makes this story so wild is that nobody can agree on where the truth ends and the legend begins. Did the Cali connection really fund the early hip-hop empire? Did that phone number actually lead to a global takedown? Or is it just how the myth grew in retelling? The internet keeps digging, but some mysteries are too deep to bury and too dangerous to answer. So now it's over to you. What do you think really happened? Was Waterhead Bo the forgotten architect of an era, or just the scapegoat for a system that loved to build heroes and break them down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's see where you stand on this one. Make sure you hit that like button if you were pulled into the chaos. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into stories the headlines barely touched, and ring the bell so you never miss the next breakdown. Because if this story proves anything, it's that one small detail can rewrite history, and sometimes the truth sounds stranger than the rumor.